Welcome to the Playing Books podcast.
Great to be here.
Today we're embarking on a truly monumental journey, diving into Titan, the life of John D. Rockefeller Sr.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't just any biography, is it? It feels like a deep immersion into the mind, the life, the legacy of someone who basically shaped modern capitalism and philanthropy too, later on.
Absolutely. Rockefeller, the name alone conjures up so much.
Yeah.
Immense wealth, sure, but also, ruthless business and then this almost paradoxical level of giving.
Right. So our mission today really is to pull out the most crucial insights from this definitive book. Give you, our listeners, a shortcut to understanding the real person behind all the myths and, frankly, the propaganda over the years.
And it's a complex person we're dealing with, full of contradictions. We'll explore what shaped him, those surprising aspects of his character, and, importantly, how his life just profoundly changed American society. For better and for worse, arguably.
Yeah.
This isn't just history class. It's like a window into how modern business and big philanthropy got started. Super relevant today, I think, for anyone involved in business or thinking about social responsibility.
Definitely. So where do we start to understand this Titan? Those early years seem crucial and chaotic.
Oh, absolutely chaotic. You really have to start with his father, William A. Rockefeller Sr., Devil Bill.
Devil Bill. Wow. Okay. He sounds like the polar opposite of the John D. We think of the methodical, controlled one.
Complete opposite. Bill was this central wild figure. He lived a double life, maybe even a triple one. Primarily, he was Doc Rockefeller.
Doc? What kind of doctor?
Well, that's the thing. He called himself the celebrated cancer specialist. Picture this flamboyant guy, silk hat, fancy coat, big beard, traveling around, giving this smooth, almost like a vaudeville patter.
Selling snake oil, basically.
Pretty much peddling supposed cancer cures for $25 a pop, which was a fortune back then, or cheaper bottles for less serious cases, apparently.
Unbelievable.
And he wasn't shy about it. Bragged about how much money he made. Someone found one of his fraudulent signs in a hotel lobby. Just pure audacity.
So how did having a father like that shape young John D.?
It seems to be the key. Devil Bill's constant deception, his scams, his nomadic life, it forged in John D. this almost obsessive need for order, for reliability, for precision, everything his father wasn't. It's a fundamental paradox that runs through his whole life.
And the chaos wasn't just in his professional life, right? His personal life was messy, too.
Oh, incredibly messy. Bill was a bigamist. Around 1852, while still married to Eliza, John D.'s mother, and with 5 kids, he married a 17-year-old named Margaret Allen.
17.
Wow. Under a fake name, Dr. Livingston. Never mentioned Eliza or the kids. Completely fooled Margaret's family. And this wasn't a short-term thing. This secret marriage lasted the rest of his life.
Good grief. So John D. grew up around this atmosphere of secrets and deception.
He must have sensed it, at least. It adds another layer of instability, doesn't it? Later, Bill even tried to distance himself from the Rockefeller name, claiming he didn't want to disgrace the family because he didn't have a medical license.
Right, overlooking the whole bigamy thing.
Exactly. The unlicensed medicine was probably the least of his worries, legally speaking.
So if Devil Bill was this whirlwind of chaos and deceit, his mother, Eliza, must have been the grounding force, the anchor.
She really had to be, Eliza Rockefeller. She came from humble beginnings herself, but she had this immense pride and deep, deep religious faith.
Which must have made Bill's long absences and lies even harder to bear.
You'd think so. Interestingly, the book mentions she was surprisingly tolerant of Nancy Brown, who was Bill's mistress before he secretly married Margaret. Eliza apparently pitied her.
Complex woman.
Very. But out of necessity, dealing with Bill, she leaned heavily on her oldest son, John D. She saw him as mature beyond his years, maybe a bit serious.
So she confided in him, gave him responsibilities?
Exactly. Adult responsibilities. Which meant he grew up fast. He effectively became a kind of surrogate father to his younger siblings.
So not much of a carefree childhood then?
Not really. The book describes him as shouldering duties that left little room for, spontaneous joy or levity. He developed this really strong sense of responsibility, almost seeing himself as a reluctant savior.
That's quite a burden for a kid.
It is. And here's another contrast. Bill hated farm work, thought it was beneath him, but John D., he actually embraced country life, believed the hard work toughened him up for the business world later on.
So that stoicism, that discipline, it started really early.
Absolutely. And that deep frugality, too. It all came from that period.
It's like you can see the blueprint forming for the ultimate homo economicus, the
Order.
rational economic man. Were there specific signs of his business brain working even as a little kid?
Oh, yeah, definitely. The entrepreneurial spirit was there from the get-go. Like
Yeah.
by age 7, he was buying candy in bulk by the pound. Then he'd divide it up into smaller portions and sell it to his brothers and sisters for a profit.
Ah, classic.
And his mother, Eliza, encouraged it. His first sort of bigger venture also happened around age 7. He apparently followed a turkey hen to her nest, raided the eggs,
No way.
raised the chicks himself.
Oh.
Eliza helped him figure out how to feed them with milk curds and then sold the turkeys.
At 7? That's incredible.
Isn't it? And years later, as an old man, he apparently said something like, "To this day, I enjoy the sight of a flock of turkeys and never miss an opportunity of studying them."
Always observing, always calculating, even with turkeys.
Exactly, that quiet focus.
You mentioned he seemed serious, maybe grim. The early photos apparently show that.
Yeah, the book points that out. Despite his later, perhaps rosier memories, the early photos show this very serious, almost expressionless face. Not much boyish fun there.
Huh.
People who knew him then remembered him as quiet, maybe a bit abstracted, always thinking. Some even thought he was, well, a bit dim-witted or forgettable.
Really? Rockefeller.
Yeah. But he was apparently a slow but very persistent learner. And he had, quote, a terrific head for math. He saw himself as reliable, methodical, but not necessarily brilliant. Education for him was purely practical, utilitarian, just preparation for life's duties.
No room for intellectual curiosity for its own sake.
Seems not. But that intense focus plus the math skills, that turned out to be a pretty powerful combination.
And overlaying all of this was his faith, his Baptist upbringing. That must have channeled that drive somehow.
Oh, profoundly. His mother's influence was huge there. The Baptist faith he grew up in taught that basically God wanted you to work hard, earn money, and then donate that money. It was a cycle.
Get all you could honorably and give all you could. I think I read that quote.
That's the one. He said, "I've always regarded it as a religious duty to get all I could honorably and to give all I could." He claims he was taught that by his minister as a boy.
So wealth wasn't bad in itself, but showing it off was.
Exactly. This low church Baptist faith didn't forbid accumulating wealth, but it strongly opposed, vanity, ostentatious displays. Flaunting it was wrong.
Which must have created a lifelong tension for him.
A huge tension between this relentless drive to acquire more and more and this deeply ingrained belief in humility and simple living.
And that tension showed up in his personal habits, his famous frugality.
Absolutely legendary. He actually took pride in what he called his threadbare adolescence. Always bought the cheapest clothes.
Even when he could afford better.
Oh, yeah. There's a famous story about him regretting for his entire life spending $2.50 on fur gloves once instead of his usual wool mittens.
$8.50.
He apparently said he still couldn't understand why he wasted the money. This focus on economy was just obsessive.
Wow.
Another anecdote, when he was a young clerk, he saw a $4,000 banknote in his employer's safe. An unbelievable amount of money then.
Yeah, unimaginable.
He admitted he kept opening the safe just to look at it, to gaze longingly at the note.
So the desire was there, but tightly controlled.
Very tightly. And his church, the Erie Street Baptist Mission Church, became incredibly important. It was like a substitute family, free from the shame and chaos of his actual father, a place for belonging and a way to channel his emotions, to control that unruly nature he might have inherited from Bill.
So all these pieces, the chaotic father, the stoic mother, the early business ventures, the deep faith, the intense frugality, they all forged the man who would eventually just dominate an entire industry.
Exactly. A crucible is a good word for it.
And the industry itself, oil, it exploded onto a very specific American scene, didn't it? A time of huge change and, well, maybe greed.
It really was. Post-1840s America, and especially after the Civil War, it was like the Wild West economically. You had banks popping up everywhere, canals being dug, steamboats, the first railroads, the telegraph, knitting the country together into national markets for the first time.
So tons of opportunity.
Tons of opportunity, but also tons of chaos.
Right.
The book calls it a time ripe for schemers and dreamers, sharp-elbowed men, and fast-talking hucksters.
Sounds familiar.
Right. There was this perfect mania for patents and inventions. And after the Civil War, there was a real money fever. Some historians think the war fought for these high ideals, kind of exhausted people's capacity for altruism.
Interesting idea.
Yeah, leaving behind this sort of residual contagion of greed, as the book puts it. Profiteering during the war hadn't helped either.
Contagion of greed. That really paints a picture. So into this landscape steps John D. Rockefeller, moving from clerk to businessman. How did his first real jobs show that Homo economicus emerging?
Even before oil, his first job as a bookkeeper, and then later as a partner in a commission house, showed his nature. For instance, when he worked for Hewitt and Tuttle, he also acted as a sort of one-man collection agency for Hewitt's rental properties.
I bet he was good at that.
Tenacious. The book describes him using bulldog tenacity. He'd apparently park his buggy outside a debtor's house and just wait, patiently, looking, quote, pale and patient as an undertaker, until they gave in.
Wow. That takes a certain kind of personality.
It does. He later said collecting those bills caused him considerable anxiety, though. Said he still dreamed about it 50 years later.
Really? Even Rockefeller had anxieties.
Seems so. The book speculates it might have been tied to a fear of ending up dependent like his father, or maybe needing to prove himself to people who initially underestimated him, thought he was dim-witted.
It makes him a bit more human.
Yeah. His first partner, Maurice Clark, apparently called him methodical to an extreme, too exact. His intensity was clear early on.
Okay, so he's building his business reputation, he's disciplined, he's tenacious, and then oil hits Pennsylvania. Drake's well in 1859. That changes everything.
Completely changes the game. Edwin Drake strikes oil near Titusville, Pennsylvania, and it's just pandemonium.
It's a gold rush.
Exactly like a gold rush, but for black gold. Fortune seekers flooded the area. Derricks shot up everywhere. Within a year, you had dozens of makeshift refineries churning out kerosene.
And Cleveland becomes a major center for this. Why Cleveland?
Geography, mostly. Cleveland was close enough to the Pennsylvania oil fields, but also had great transportation links, Lake Erie for shipping, plus emerging railroads. This gave businesses there, like Rockefeller's future company, crucial leverage to negotiate better shipping rates.
Ah, the transportation angle. That becomes key later, doesn't it?
Absolutely critical. The Cleveland newspapers were buzzing about the mad hubbub and the rush to the oleaginous locations. Great word, oleaginous.
Aha, oily locations.
Right. And starting a refinery then was relatively cheap, maybe $1,000 or so. Profits were rolling in thick and fast. It was the perfect environment for someone with Rockefeller's particular skills and mindset.
And this is where Standard Oil is born. Out of this chaos, he creates order, or at least control.
Precisely. The Standard Oil Company of Ohio, formed January 10th, 1870, with $1 million in capital, which was enormous for the time, an instant giant. Rockefeller was president.
And the name Standard Oil, was that just the name of one of their refineries?
It was, but it was also brilliant marketing. In an era when kerosene could be impure and, frankly, dangerous, prone to exploding lamps, advertising standard quality suggested safety, reliability, uniformity.
Smart. Addressing a real consumer fear.
Very smart. And Rockefeller's core philosophy, the thing that drove everything, was economies of scale. He understood earlier and better than almost anyone that size was power.
Bigger means cheaper per unit.
Exactly. By getting bigger, he could slash his cost per barrel. The book says he cut them almost in half over his career. That let him undercut competitors, offer cheaper products, and avoid what he called the dreadful competition that he saw as wasteful and destructive.
So efficiency was his mantra, his gospel, almost.
It really was his foundation principle, as he called it. He wasn't just playing the game, he was redesigning the entire board. He saw that real, lasting power came from controlling the whole system, the whole value chain, transportation, refining, marketing, not just one piece.
But achieving that scale, that control, it involved methods that weren't exactly popular, which brings us to things like the South Improvement Company. That sounds ominous.
Oh, it was a huge scandal. And this is where Rockefeller's later accounts maybe bent the truth a bit. He claimed he was reluctantly dragged into the South Improvement Company, or SIC, by the railroads.
But that wasn't the case.
The evidence suggests he was a prime mover, promoting it zealously, as the book says. He even wrote to his wife, Seti, something like, "A man who succeeds in life must sometimes go against the current."
So what was the SIC trying to do?
It was essentially a secret cartel. Standard Oil and a few other large refiners teamed up with the major railroads. The railroads would give the SIC members massive rebates on their oil shipments.
Okay.
But here's the kicker. The railroads would also charge non-members higher rates and then secretly pay a portion of that extra charge back to the SIC members.
Whoa. So Standard Oil would get money even when their competitors shipped oil?
Exactly. It was
Yeah.
designed to crush independent refiners and producers.
Yeah.
A blatant attempt to monopolize.
I can imagine the reaction.
Furious.
Yeah.
Immediate public outcry, especially in the oil regions. The newspapers went wild. The oil city derrick called Rockefeller the Mephistopheles of Cleveland and blacklisted the conspirators.
Mephistopheles. That's harsh.
It was intense. There were threats, effigies burned, Standard Oil barrels were vandalized with skulls and crossbones. It was genuinely dangerous.
And this is where Ida Tarbell comes in, the famous muckraking journalist.
Yes, this period left a huge mark on her. She was just a teenager then, living in the oil region. Her father was an independent oil producer caught up in the turmoil. He signed a pledge not to sell oil to the Cleveland ogre.
So her later expose of Standard Oil, it was personal.
Deeply personal,
Yeah.
rooted right in this nightmarish period, as the book calls it.
How did Rockefeller justify this SIC scheme to himself, given his religious background?
Well, he tried. He wrote to SETI that their plans were just and warranted. He argued it wasn't really a conspiracy against producers, but a way to bring order, to ensure steady prices and adequate returns in a chaotic market.
Rationalization, maybe?
Perhaps. He seemed to view the outrage from smaller producers as just envy and hypocrisy. He thought they only opposed rebates when they weren't the ones getting them.
But the political pressure was too much.
Way too much.
Yeah.
The Pennsylvania legislature revoked the SIC charter pretty quickly. A congressional committee slammed it as a gigantic and daring conspiracy. Rockefeller had to back down publicly. But the experience probably just solidified his belief that cooperation, his kind of cooperation, was better than competition.
Even though the SIC failed, Standard Oil kept growing, kept consolidating. They found other ways.
Oh, absolutely. They became masters of consolidation.
Right.
Rebates were still key. They used their massive shipping volume, far bigger than anyone else's, to basically badger the railroads into giving them preferential rates.
Like, give us a better deal because we ship so much.
Exactly. A competitor like, say, Hannah might complain, and the railroad would say, sure, you can have the same rate if you ship the same massive volume, which of course they couldn't.
So it effectively forced smaller players out, or forced them to sell to Standard.
Pretty much. Sell out or go under, and then came the pipelines. That was maybe even more decisive.
Standard built its own pipelines.
They did, a huge comprehensive network. Soon, they controlled maybe a third of all the crude oil flowing out of the Pennsylvania fields. This gave them enormous power, even more leverage than refining, some argued.
Because if you couldn't get your oil into their pipeline...
The oil strike was practically worthless. You had no way to get it to market efficiently. Standard could dictate terms. They even strategically bought up strips of land, deadlines, just to block rivals from building competing pipelines.
Wow, playing hardball.
And they allegedly conspired with railroads to deny permission for rival pipelines to cross railroad tracks. It was total system control.
Given all this, the rebates, the pipeline dominance, the forcing out of competitors, how did Rockefeller avoid serious legal trouble for so long? It sounds like blatant monopoly building.
Well, he was very, very careful and very well advised. The book describes him as engaging in a 30-year career as a fugitive from justice, essentially.
30 years.
A combination of things. Political influence, certainly. When indictments came down in Pennsylvania, for instance, New York officials, possibly influenced, refused extradition requests. He used his company's financial clout, too, like offering bonuses or preferential deals to railroads for their cooperation.
So working the system from the inside.
And sometimes the laws themselves had loopholes or unintended consequences. The Interstate Commerce Act of 1887 was supposed to ban rebates,
Right.
but it had unexpected dividends for Standard. For example, it allowed railroads to charge freight based on barrel weight. Standard Oil, with its efficiency, could absorb that cost easily. Smaller independents shipping in heavier, less efficient barrels, it hurt them badly.
So the law actually helped Standard in some ways.
It seems so. Plus, Standard controlled the market for essential railroad lubricants through a subsidiary, Galena Signal Oil. They could use that leverage, too. Maybe delay shipments for competitors using rival lubricants or tack on surcharges.
That's subtle.
And their huge fleet of owned tank cars. They apparently managed to get railroads to pay the mileage fees, not just for the outbound trip with full tanks, but also for the return trip with empty tanks, a double mileage tribute.
Unbelievable. So they always found a way around the rules.
They were masters at finding ways to evade the law and slip back into well-worn arrangements. And Rockefeller himself, especially later when public relations became more important, carefully crafted his language.
How so?
He avoided words like trust or monopoly. He preferred cooperation. He framed it as bringing order and efficiency, replacing the chaotic condition of free markets, which he seemed to genuinely disdain, dismissing Adam Smith's ideas as just textbook theory.
He really believed his way was better.
It seems he did. He saw competition as wasteful and destructive. Cooperation under his guidance was progress. He never, ever publicly acknowledged the 1911 Supreme Court decision breaking up Standard Oil in his later interviews. Just ignored it.
It's fascinating how he could maintain that public narrative alongside the ruthless reality of his business practices. Let's shift focus a bit. What about the man himself, behind the scenes, his family life? Did that intense frugality carry over into raising his own kids?
Oh, absolutely. The Rockefeller household was run with the same principles: order, piety, and extreme frugality. His wife, Laura Celestia Spellman, they called her SETI, she was the general manager at home.
And she enforced the rules.
Yeah, definitely. She made the children keep careful account books of every penny they spent. Pocket money wasn't just given, it had to be earned through chores.
Like what kind of chores?
The book gives examples like 2 cents for killing a certain number of flies, 10 cents for sharpening all the pencils in the house, practicing music lessons. Rockefeller Sr. took pride in this, treating them as miniature household workers. He never stopped preaching economy, saving scraps of paper, bits of string.
Even with all that wealth pouring in.
Even then, it was deeply ingrained.
And said he was on board with this.
Completely. There's a great story about bicycles. The kids wanted them naturally. John D. suggested maybe getting one for each.
Seems reasonable for a Rockefeller.
But SETI said no. Just one for all of them. Her reasoning: if they have just one, they will learn to give up to one another, instilling self-sacrifice.
Wow. That's disciplined.
It really was.
Yeah.
Their son, John D. Jr., later admitted he wore his older sister's hand-me-down dresses until he was about 8 years old.
Seriously. Dresses.
Yep. Because he was the youngest, and they didn't waste anything. And the religious side was just as strict. Daily family prayers before breakfast. If you were late, you paid a penny fine. Nightly scripture readings. It was intense.
Said sounds like a formidable woman in her own right.
She was. Described as having gentle tenacity. Very religious, like him, but also fiercely democratic in her own way. Hated showing off wealth, apparently patched her own clothes sometimes, did housework even when they had staff. She truly believed in John D.'s goodness, adored him.
But the public attacks on him must have been hard for her.
Terribly hard. The book notes that his letters to her, which used to contain business details, became much more bland and vague about business starting in the 1880s. Maybe he was trying to shield her.
Did it take a toll on her health?
It seems likely. She suffered what was called a mild stroke in 1904, right when Ida Tarbell's expose was hitting its peak. She never fully recovered. The stress must have been immense, but they were clearly kindred spirits, especially on religion. She was also cultured, played piano, loved literature.
It sounds like an incredibly intense environment to grow up in, especially for the only son, John D. Rockefeller, Jr. How did he handle it all, carrying that name, that legacy, that pressure?
Junior had a tough time, by all accounts. His childhood is often described as melancholy. He was tutored at home for years, didn't mix much, described himself later as shy, ill-adjusted, and frail as a boy.
And his mother, SETI, really instilled that moral code in him.
Oh, intensely.
Yeah.
She fired him with that same crusading Christian spirit, the book says, and a real horror of alcohol. When he was only 10, he signed this solemn pledge to abstain from tobacco, profanity, and any intoxicating beverages for life.
At 10, wow.
Yeah. So imagine the conflict. His father is being publicly denounced as this ruthless monopolist, a corporate criminal, while his mother's filling him brimful of morality and religion.
That's quite the contradiction to navigate.
It led to what the book calls an upside-down worldview for Junior, the righteous Rockefeller family, under siege from this godless, uncomprehending world. He internalized that defensiveness.
And that defensiveness, maybe that insecurity, led to that infamous American Beauty Rose speech.
Ah, yes, the rose analogy.
Yeah.
That really stuck to him. It was 1902. He was giving a talk at the Brown University YMCA, trying to reconcile business practices with his faith.
And he compared big business consolidation to pruning a rose.
Exactly. He said something like, the beautiful American Beauty Rose can only be produced by sacrificing the earlier buds that grow around it. So large corporations achieve perfection by essentially trimming away the smaller, weaker competition.
Oof. Not the best analogy, maybe.
Definitely not. It was apparently an off-the-cuff remark, but it got seized upon as this perfect expression of rapacious capitalism. a credo he spent years trying to live down.
And adding to his insecurity, his father kept him on a tight financial leash for a long time, didn't he?
For a remarkably long time, Senior kept Junior on what was basically a glorified allowance until he was 38 years old.
38. Even though he was working in the family business.
Yep. Junior himself lamented it. He apparently said something like, "The girls in the office here have an advantage that I never had. I envy anybody who can do that," meaning earn their own independent living. He felt he lacked proof of his own commercial worth.
That must have been difficult. Did his marriage to Abby Aldrich help him find his own footing? She came from a very different background.
His marriage to Abby was absolutely crucial for him. She seemed to provide the emotional support and, frankly, the connection to a wider world that he desperately needed. He apparently clung to her, relied heavily on her judgment.
And she brought some lightness into his life.
Definitely. Abby was much more outgoing, loved society. She helped him finally savor all the romanticism repressed during his upbringing. Through her, he started to explore things his parents disapproved of, like dancing.
Dancing was a sin.
To his parents, yes, a sinful passion. But Junior, influenced by Abby in college life, eventually succumbed. Apparently practiced dance steps in his dorm room. By the time he graduated, he was dancing several times a week.
That's quite a rebellion in Rockefeller terms.
It really was. The press even commented on the odd match, the fun-loving Aldriches and the very serious, pious Rockefellers. Junior was still teaching Sunday school, didn't approve of cards or revealing dresses, at least initially.
And Abby's father, Senator Aldrich, he was no stranger to wealth and power himself, was he?
Not at all. Senator Nelson Aldrich was a major political player, known as a devoted servant of the trusts. He used his position to amass a fortune, maybe $16 million by his death, which was huge then.
So, quite a contrast to Rockefeller Sr.'s outward simplicity.
Oh, yeah. Aldrich built a massive 99-room mansion, sailed a huge yacht. Lincoln Steffens, the muckraker, called him the political boss of the United States. His motto was apparently, deny nothing, explain nothing. Very different style.
Interesting connection. So Junior, despite his shyness and strict upbringing, he was slowly changing.
He was. College helped. People at Brown generally liked him, though some found him a bit of a hopeless prig. Here's a funny story of a student heckling him. "Here comes Johnny Rock, reeking with virtue and without one redeeming vice."
Poor Junior.
But he did seem to mellow, become more tolerant, more focused on the spirit rather than the strict letter of the law, as he wrote to his grandmother. His parents, though, were reportedly ecstatic when he got his college class to abstain from alcohol at their final supper. Old habits die hard.
So he's finding his own way, but still very much under that family shadow. And all this is happening just as the muckraking journalists are really turning up the heat on his father and Standard Oil.
Exactly. The timing was intense. Ida Tarbell's series in McClure's magazine, starting in 1902, was a sensation. It created, as the book says, a terrible popular dread about Rockefeller's power and methods.
His image was suddenly unavoidable.
Everywhere. Cartoons galore. One showed him at a newsstand asking if they had any magazines that weren't about him. Another had him weighing his coins against a sign, reading a few kind words, wondering what he'd give for them.
He became a symbol.
The ultimate symbol of the feared monopoly. Frederick Gaze, his key advisor later on, said Rockefeller was constantly hunted, stalked, and hounded, almost like a wild animal.
A total change from the carefully controlled image he preferred. Did he ever have to face his critics directly?
Very rarely. But there was one notable incident recounted in the book with a man named George Rice, who claimed Standard Oil had ruined his business.
What happened?
Rice confronted Rockefeller directly, accused him loudly. "You ruined me," Rockefeller's response.
Yeah.
Just repeating Shah, evasively.
That's it.
Pretty much. Rice pressed him. "It's no use you're saying for Shaw, you know damned well you did." Rockefeller just gave a slight, maybe uncomfortable, funereal smile, tipped his hat, and walked away.
Wow. Not exactly a robust defense.
No. His successor, John D. Archbold, had a very different style, much more aggressive. He publicly accused Rice of trying to extort money from Standard Oil. During a court recess, Archbold apparently jabbed his finger at Rice and yelled, "You are nothing but wind and weight."
And Rice fired back.
Oh, yeah. Rice retorted, "And you are nothing but money stolen from the people." Archbold seemed to genuinely believe public opinion didn't matter at all, which, in the muckraking era, was probably not the smartest approach.
No kidding. Playing right into their hands. And Ida Tarbell leading this charge, we mentioned her personal connection. Her father's experiences really fueled her.
Immensely. The book emphasizes her deep personal animosity. It wasn't just abstract journalism for her. Her father was involved in the oil business, suffered during the Consolidation Wars. As she was writing the series, her father was actually dying of stomach cancer.
Oh, wow.
That likely further embittered her toward Rockefeller. And her father had warned her not to take on Standard Oil, told her they will ruin the magazine, maybe even physically harm her. That shows the level of fear the company inspired.
So she had support from other critics.
Yes, especially Henry Damaris Lloyd, who had written Wealth Against Commonwealth, another major critique. Initially, Lloyd was suspicious Tarbell might be secretly working for Standard Oil.
Really? Why?
Maybe because she got access. But as her articles came out, Lloyd was completely won over. He apparently said, when you get through with Johnny, I don't think there will be very much left of him except something resembling one of his own grease spots. High praise from him. He then gave her all his research notes.
So the pressure was immense. How did Rockefeller Sr. handle it personally? Did it break him?
Publicly. No. Privately. It's harder to say. When he first spoke about Tarbell to his official biographer later, he apparently lost his cool for a moment, had a torrent of intemperate abuse, calling her a poison woman with a poisoned tongue.
So it definitely got under his skin.
For a moment. But then, almost immediately, he regained his composure, his philosophic calm, claiming he felt pity for her, not bitterness. The mask went right back up.
That famous control?
Exactly. Tarbell's strategy was smart, though. She made Rockefeller himself the central character, the embodiment of Standard Oil. He became the face of the trust. During this period, he basically hid out at his estate, Forest Hill, only appearing in public for church on Sundays.
And even church became a spectacle.
A total circus spectacle, the book says.
Oh.
Hundreds of people, reporters, gawkers would gather. He'd nervously ask his bodyguard, "Are there any of our friends, the reporters, here?" He even admitted feeling anxious, wanting to bolt, fearing people would think he was a coward if he didn't show up.
The most powerful man in America, afraid of reporters at church? That's quite an image. But the real devastation, it seems, was felt by his son, Junior.
It hit Junior incredibly hard. Remember how steeped he was in his parents' morality? Now, suddenly, his father is being portrayed as this arch criminal. His own children were confused, disoriented.
How do they cope?
They basically fell back on faith, an implicit belief in father's integrity, as the book puts it. It wasn't based on facts, because Senior rarely offered specific defenses, just general denials. That lack of specific rebuttal apparently especially tormented his son.
Because Junior had taken the morality so seriously.
Exactly. And Junior was already prone to stress-related illnesses. With each installment of Tarbell's series, his symptoms, migraines, insomnia got worse. By late 1904, he was on the verge of a complete nervous breakdown.
Wow.
Doctors ordered him to take a full year off, send him to Cannes in the south of France to recuperate. He later privately blamed the Tarbell series and the related tainted money controversy for his collapse.
While Senior himself, outwardly at least, remained unflappable.
Pretty much. The public liked to imagine Senior brooding, but by all accounts, Rockefeller Sr. did not waver or buckle. He kept up appearances, even made jokes about being a selfish monopolist at Sunday school, getting applause.
It's fascinating, though, how this period of intense criticism seems to directly precede his shift towards massive, systematic philanthropy, almost like a response.
It's a compelling idea, and the timing is certainly suggestive. Whether it was purely PR or a genuine evolution or likely a mix, this period marks a huge pivot. And a key figure here was Frederick T. Gates.
Gates, he wasn't originally a finance guy, was he? He was a minister.
That's right, a Baptist minister. He got into fundraising, proved incredibly good at it, helping raise money for Baptist educational causes. He was strategic, persuasive.
And he caught Rockefeller's eye.
He did. Rockefeller needed someone to help manage his increasing charitable donations, which were becoming overwhelming. Gates was brought in initially just part-time, but Gates wasn't just a fundraiser, he was also a sharp investigator.
How so?
There's a great story where Rockefeller had invested in some mines out west, the San Miguel Consolidated Mines. Gates suspected something was fishy. He actually traveled out to Colorado himself, investigated, and discovered the mines were basically phantoms. A damned swindle, he called it.
So he saved Rockefeller money and proved his worth.
Exactly. It cemented Rockefeller's trust in him. Gates then became the main architect of shifting Rockefeller's giving, from just writing checks to creating a system, a strategy for philanthropy, making it business-like.
So moving from charity to strategic investment in social good almost, what were some of the first big institutions that came out of this new approach?
Several key ones. Early on, even before Gates fully took over, Rockefeller anonymously funded Spelman Seminary in Atlanta, a school for black women. He named it after his wife's family, the Spelmans, declining to use his own name.
And Spelman became a major institution.
Hugely respected. Martin Luther King Jr.'s mother and grandmother were alumni. Then there was the University of Chicago. That was a massive undertaking.
Rockefeller basically founded it, right?
Provided the crucial initial and ongoing funding. It was built incredibly quickly under its first president, William Rainey Harper. Harper was aggressive. He raided faculties from Ivy League schools, offered big salaries to get top names. Figures like John Dewey in philosophy, George Herbert Mead. He started the first sociology graduate department in America. Some critics, like Thorstein Veblen, satirized Harper as a captain of erudition, applying business methods to academia.
And then there's the medical research. That seems like a really significant shift, especially given his father's history as a quack doctor.
It's a fascinating counterpoint, isn't it? The Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, RANR, founded in 1901. This was groundbreaking. The first institution in America dedicated solely to biomedical research. Not teaching, not patient care primarily, but research.
And he put his name on this one.
He did. Pledged a huge sum for the time, $200,000 over 10 years, which grew much larger later. The director, Abraham Flexner, was key, another sharp, demanding administrator who insisted on high standards, top salaries, and even an attached hospital for clinical studies.
And it had real impact.
Huge impact. They developed an anti-meningitis serum there that dramatically cut the death rate for spinal meningitis from like 75% down to 25%. And that specific breakthrough had a personal connection for Mark Twain. His own daughter had died of spinal meningitis. When Twain learned about the RIMR serum, he became a vocal supporter of Rockefeller, helping with his image rehabilitation.
That's incredible. Medicine based on science, not scams.
Exactly. A direct repudiation of the Doc Rockefeller world.
What about broader educational initiatives beyond the University of Chicago?
That led to the General Education Board, the GEB, established in 1903. This was significant because it got a federal charter from Congress, pushed through by Senator Aldrich, Abby's father.
So official government recognition.
Yes, the only Rockefeller philanthropy to get that. Its mission was broad: promote education within the United States without distinction of race, sex, or creed. Very forward-thinking language for 1903.
And Rockefeller's involvement, was he hands-on?
Interestingly, no. Given the ongoing Tarbell attacks, he kept his distance publicly. Delegated oversight to Junior and Gates. He never even met with the GEB board. The book notes that researchers couldn't find a single letter signed by Rockefeller Sr. in the early GEB files.
Huh. So he funded it massively but stayed out of the details.
He approved the major appropriations, like the first $1 million grant, stipulating it be paid out over 10 years to ensure careful planning, applying those business-like principles again. But the day-to-day was left to others.
So he's pouring unprecedented amounts of money into these large-scale systematic projects. But this must have also fueled the tainted money debate, right? The idea that this money earned through ruthless means shouldn't be accepted.
Oh, absolutely. That controversy exploded right around this time. Gates had arranged a large donation, $100,000, to the Congregational Church's Mission Board. He expected praise, positive headlines.
And instead,
the announcement was buried. The church board said they received it with surprise, implying it was unsolicited. No real thanks. Then a huge backlash erupted.
from within the church.
Yes, prominent congregational ministers, having read Tarbell's articles in McClure's, demanded the money be returned. They argued it was procured through nefarious methods, and accepting it would compromise the church's integrity.
The tainted money argument. How did Rockefeller react to that?
Again, outwardly, he seemed unfazed. The public might have expected him to be crestfallen, but reports from the time show him in excellent spirits at church the following Sunday. He even made that witty crack about not being a selfish monopolist during his Sunday school talk.
He really had mastered that public composure by then. So what was his overall philosophy of giving if he was so hands-off with the GEB?
His style was very impersonal, very arm's length. He relied on Gates and other experts to identify needs and structure programs. He'd approve the big decisions, often via brief notes, but he wasn't involved in the day-to-day execution.
Which some people criticized.
Yes, Charles Eliot, the famous former president of Harvard, apparently lamented that this detached method cut him off from the real happiness which good deeds brought to the doer. Rockefeller wasn't getting the personal satisfaction, perhaps.
But the impact was undeniable.
Undeniable. And global. The Rockefeller Foundation, established later, became the biggest grant-making foundation in the world. They funded public health infrastructure globally, schools of hygiene at Johns Hopkins, Harvard, but also in places like Calcutta, Copenhagen, fellowship programs, the Peking Union Medical College in China, a massive project to bring modern Western medicine there.
So it wasn't just about America.
Not at all. His medical philanthropy alone, totaling around $450 million eventually, fundamentally changed global health and medical research. It delivered a mortal blow, as the book says, to the old world of 19th century medicine, the world of his father. It pioneered a whole new model of philanthropy focused on creating and disseminating knowledge.
It's an astonishing transformation from Devil Bill's son to the architect of modern medical philanthropy. But the empire that funded all this, Standard Oil, it couldn't escape judgment forever, could it? The antitrust fight finally came to a head.
It did. The government's antitrust suit against Standard Oil was epic. Fitting, maybe, that the biggest business empire faced the biggest antitrust case of its time?
What was the scale of it?
Massive. The trial involved something like 444 witnesses, 11 million words of testimony, over 1,300 exhibits from 21 volumes. Plus, Standard Oil was fighting off lawsuits in 21 different states simultaneously. It was this huge, drawn-out morality play, as the book calls it.
Who led the government's case?
A key figure was Frank B. Kellogg, who later became Secretary of State and won a Nobel Peace Prize. The government was determined. Even President Taft, who apparently liked Rockefeller personally, loathed the trust and pursued antitrust action even more aggressively than Teddy Roosevelt.
So Rockefeller couldn't rely on political connections indefinitely?
No, public and political sentiment had really turned. Though Rockefeller himself seemed overly optimistic, telling colleagues as late as 1909 that he thought public opinion was shifting back in their favor. He misread the room, I think.
So the inevitable verdict comes down.
May 15, 1911. The Supreme Court, led by Chief Justice Edward White, upholds the lower court ruling. Standard Oil must be dismantled.
How? What'd that mean practically?
The company was given 6 months to spin off its dozens of subsidiary companies into independent entities. And the officers, like Rockefeller and Archbold, were forbidden from conspiring to recreate the monopoly. It was the definitive end of the Standard Oil Trust as a single entity.
The end of an era. But did it actually diminish Rockefeller's wealth or power in the long run?
Here's the ultimate irony. No. In fact, the breakup probably preserved his legacy and made him even richer.
How is that possible?
Because he and the other major shareholders retained their stock in all the newly independent companies, and many of those stepchildren companies. The predecessors of Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Amoco, Conoco thrived enormously in the 20th century.
So breaking them up unleashed their individual potential.
Exactly. They became the dominant forces in the global oil industry, the Seven Sisters. The trustbusters had aimed to break Rockefeller's power, but inadvertently they just diversified his holdings and set the stage for his wealth to grow even larger as these separate companies boomed. He became unquestionably the richest man in the world because of the breakup.
That is just incredible. Fate has a strange sense of humor. Meanwhile, as Senior is dealing with this, Junior is continuing on his own path, becoming more involved in social issues, right? Especially after the Ludlow strike.
Yes, the Ludlow massacre in 1914 at a Rockefeller-controlled coal mine in Colorado was another huge crisis, this time falling squarely on Junior as Senior was effectively retired. The backlash was intense. Upton Sinclair publicly accused Junior of murder. There were death threats.
How did Junior handle that?
It shook him badly.
Yeah.
Unlike his father, he wasn't unflappable. He started carrying a pistol, had watchmen posted at his house. But the experience also seemed to catalyze a genuine transformation. He became a real advocate for improving labor relations, not just at Rockefeller companies, but across American industry.
So moving beyond just defending the family name.
Yes. He and his advisor, Mackenzie King, who later became Prime Minister of Canada, pushed for employee representation plans. Junior even sold his stock at U.S. Steel in 1920 when they refused to end the brutal 12-hour day, 7-day week. His wife, Abby, supported unions too, maybe even more radically than Junior was comfortable with. Ludlow changed him.
And his social concerns went into other areas too, things like public health.
Definitely. Driven by that ingrained moralism, maybe that desire for impossible purity, as the book puts it. He served on a grand jury investigating prostitution or white slavery in New York. When the city didn't act on the jury's recommendations, Junior decided to fund the research himself.
Creating his own organization.
Yes, the Bureau of Social Hygiene. He personally financed it for 25 years. It studied all sorts of urban problems, STDs, birth control access, drug addiction, really tackling controversial issues head-on. His mother even sent him money specifically to promote sex ed for female students. He collaborated with prominent Jewish leaders like Jacob Schiff to protect immigrant women. He was using his money for social change in ways his father likely never would have.
And he also became this massive patron of the arts and historical preservation, didn't he? Especially internationally.
He really did. On a trip to France in the 1920s, he and Abby saw the terrible condition of the Palace of Versailles.
Just falling apart.
Pretty much. Junior spontaneously offered the French Prime Minister $1 million, a huge sum, to fix the roof, restore the gardens, plus help repair Fontainebleau Palace and Rheims Cathedral, which was damaged in World War I.
How was that received in France?
They loved him for it. And they especially loved his unassuming manner. There's a story about him showing up at Versailles on a day it was closed, and instead of demanding entry as a major donor, he just politely turned around and went back to Paris. That won him huge respect.
Classy move.
And his cultural giving was global. He helped rebuild the library at Tokyo's Imperial University after an earthquake, funded the excavation of the ancient agora in Athens, established an Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago, paid for the Palestine Museum in Jerusalem. Just incredible scope.
And Colonial Williamsburg. That was his project too, wasn't it?
Yes, though he needed some persuading on that one. A local rector, Reverend W.A.R. Goodwin, had this dream of restoring the entire colonial capital. Junior initially said no.
So how did Goodwin change his mind?
Persistence. During a visit, Junior casually asked if there were any plans to preserve the historic buildings. Goodwin seized the opening, saw that ray of divine sunlight, and later just bombarded Junior with drawings and plans until Junior finally agreed to fund the whole massive restoration.
An amazing legacy Junior built in his own right. So back to Senior. In his final decades, how did his public image change? Did people forget the Mephistopheles label?
Remarkably, yes. His image underwent a major rehabilitation. Several factors played into it. American attitudes towards great wealth were maybe softening a bit. Time itself put a mellow glow on his past business battles. And crucially, people started associating him more with his immense philanthropy than with Standard Oil's depredations.
And the press, which had hounded him, came around.
Completely. The book says the press became his biggest cheering section. Newspapers that once vilified him, like Pulitzer's World, were running editorials praising how wisely he was spending his fortune. The Hearst papers called the Rockefellers the greatest benefactor in history. Quite the turnaround.
Hard to believe. What was his actual life like in retirement? Did he live lavishly?
No, quite the opposite. He developed what the book calls a fetish of simplicity. He wrote about wanting to get down to the Benjamin Franklin idea of living, not being enslaved by things.
So where did he live?
His main winter residence was the Casements in Ormond Beach, Florida. It was a comfortable but relatively modest house, especially for the world's richest man. He'd planned small additions by drawing outlines in the sand with his cane or sketching on scraps of paper.
Still frugal.
Always. He loved music, though. Had a Steinway, a Victrola, even a church organ installed. And he surprisingly embraced publicity in his old age, especially newsreels.
The early movie cameras?
Yeah. He appeared in them golfing, celebrating birthdays, leading hymns. He came across as this slightly eccentric but endearing grandfatherly figure, an anachronistic old gentleman who somehow became an American legend.
And the dimes. We have to talk of the dimes.
Ah, the dime-giving ritual, that became iconic. He started handing out shiny new dimes to people he met, golf caddies, hotel staff, children, sometimes even famous visitors like Harvey Firestone.
Just handing them out.
Often with a little flourish, almost like a blessing. He'd say in his reedy voice, "Bless you, bless you." Sometimes he'd tease people, pretending to withhold it, or give them a horse chestnut instead, claiming it was for rheumatism.
Why dimes?
Part thrift, a dime was still meaningful, but not extravagant. Part lesson in saving. Part just a memorable, quirky public relations gesture. And the newsreels captured it, cementing this image of the benevolent old billionaire handing out dimes. It totally reshaped his public persona.
So how did this titan, this contradictory figure, spend his very last days?
He lived to be almost 98. Towards the end, his body was frail, but his mind was reportedly still sharp. Still followed the stock market, still enjoyed gentle humor with his staff.
Did he have any reflections on his long life?
He credited his longevity partly to golf, which he played obsessively, and partly to taking a tablespoon of olive oil daily. The very end sounds peaceful. His housekeeper commented that he looked well, had some color from the sun. He just gave her a wordless smile. He passed away quietly soon after.
Maintaining that composure right to the end?
Seems so. He'd outlived almost everyone his siblings, his old partners. Still frugal, too. For his 80th birthday, Junior offered him a Rolls-Royce or a $14,000 check. He took the check.
Of course he did. And physically, he'd changed a lot from the tall young man.
Yeah, years of very careful eating and bone loss made him quite small and wizened in old age, no taller than Junior.
It's quite the life story. What about the generations that followed? Did Senior show much interest in the huge projects Junior was undertaking, like Rockefeller Center?
It seems not, curiously. The book mentions his grandson, John D. III, also struggled a bit under Junior's control, continuing the pattern, perhaps. But Senior himself was curiously indifferent to things like Rockefeller Center or Colonial Williamsburg, projects that would bear his name forever.
He never visited Rockefeller Center.
Probably never set foot in it. Junior said his father just wasn't interested in things of that sort. He might ask about the financing or if there were labor troubles, but not about the architecture or the grand vision. Always back to the bottom line, perhaps.
Fascinating. And those deep family rifts, like with his brother Frank. Did they ever heal?
Not with Frank, sadly. Frank Rockefeller remained deeply bitter towards John D. his whole life. He struggled in business, maybe resented John's success. Even on his deathbed in 1917, Frank was apparently still ranting against his oldest brother.
Did John D. try to reconcile?
Frank's biggest fear was reportedly that John might try to visit him. After Frank died, John and their brother William did attend the funeral, though Frank was buried separately from the main family plot. But John D. quietly canceled all the significant debts Frank owed him. An act of private forgiveness, perhaps.
Despite Frank publicly attacking him for years.
Yes. During the muckraking era, Frank became a go-to source for reporters looking for negative quotes about John D., calling his actions heartless villainy. Coming from a brother, those quotes had a huge impact, even though the book suggests John's actual financial dealings with Frank over the years were generally fair, even supportive. But the bitterness remained.
What an incredible, complex story. We've journeyed through the life of John D. Rockefeller Sr., the chaos of Double Bill, the ruthless genius of Standard Oil, the contradictions, and then this staggering scale of philanthropy.
It really is a life that forces you to wrestle with big questions. Ambition, morality, efficiency, legacy. How do they fit together? His story is just layer upon layer, the drive, the piety, the ruthlessness, the vision. It's endlessly fascinating.
We really hope this podcast has given you, our listeners, a valuable shortcut to understanding this pivotal, complex figure in American history. And now, the challenge is for you to take these ideas, these stories, these insights from Titan, and let them enhance your own thinking.
Yeah, whether it's thinking about how markets work, or the complexities of family dynamics and wealth, or maybe the potential and pitfalls of large-scale giving, there's so much here.
Absolutely. And if we've whetted your appetite, we strongly encourage you to delve deeper.
Definitely. The book itself, Titan, The Life of John D. Rockefeller Sr. by Ron Chernow, is just packed with detail, a phenomenal read.
So consider purchasing the book to really explore every facet of this life. We also think it's great to engage directly with authors when possible. Find Ron Chernow on social media, share your biggest takeaways from the book, or even from this discussion. Let him know what you learned.
That engagement, sharing ideas, discussing these things, that's what makes learning from these great books and being part of this Playing Books community so rewarding. Your participation really matters.
So thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Titan.
We really hope you found it insightful, maybe sparked some new thoughts, and that it was time well spent.
Don't forget to follow, subscribe, and maybe share the Playing Books podcast with friends or colleagues who love a great story and, let's be honest, a good shortcut to knowledge. We'll be back soon with another fascinating book.